Well, thank you very much indeed, Christian. And I think the first thing that I want to say to you all is I think it's really great that so many of you have actually come here today in such large numbers to really get your heads around the CRC. And my reason for coming along is that, and I suppose I'm speaking really as a Member of Parliament with a constituency interest, but also inevitably as a Labour MP, but also as Chairman of the Environmental Audit Select Committee. And I just want to say a little bit, if I may, about the Environmental Audit Select Committee, which I chair, because we've got this cross-cutting role, which I just think is so important in terms of trying to put CRC and everything else that is going on the environment and on energy into some kind of framework. And for me, if Parliament is going to have a role in all of that, we need, and the members of my committee need, to understand what the bigger picture is within which each and every single policy initiative is actually operating. And believe you me, that is really hard. And I feel that so many of you who've come here today from both local government and from the private sector, who are struggling with the, if you like, hands-on jobs of implementing the CRC, and at the same time perhaps taking part in the consultation which the DEC department has now undertaken, it's really important that we do have an informed debate, but that everything that each of us does, whether it's you on the ground, is able to inform DEC in terms of what happens, but equally that there's this cross-cutting role as well. And so it's really an enviable task for someone like me to come along here and be part of this debate. But I feel that this debate is so important that it's something that we've all got to engage with. Now, I was at a similar sort of debate, which was about sustainable development, just a fortnight ago. And one of the speakers on the platform was from the NHS, and he was responsible for sustainable development there. And he asked a question which kind of produced a ripple of alarm around the audience. And his question was, which one of you would like to go on Newsnight tonight and be interviewed by Jeremy Paxman and explain what the issues are in terms of embedding sustainable development into policy? And everybody kind of thought, hope it's not going to have to be me, because it is such a difficult context to get across in the national level. And I just want to dwell on that a little bit, because I don't think that there is the understanding across, whether it's business, whether it's the public sector, the private sector, and most importantly, the general public. I really don't think that we have got the language in which to talk about sustainable development, or that we have got the tools. And what we're doing is that we are at a very, very early stage, even now, of trying to take forward the whole environmental agenda, and of course central to that is the climate change agenda as well. And that's why what I want to do is just refer briefly to the Environmental Audit Select Committee, which has a role in all of that, because we were set up 13 years ago by the then Labour government. Unlike every other select committee in the House of Commons other than the Public Accounts Committee, and each other select committee looks what the Home Office does, looks what the Department of Business does, looks what the Department of Health does, and it audits or scrutinises government policy against its sort of objectives. But 13 years ago, it was recognised that there wasn't anything about the environment that needed to be there, or it did need to be there. There wasn't anything that was there that should be there in a cross-cutting way. And so a decision was made to set up a select committee of the House of Commons made up of 16 members, set up a little bit like the Public Accounts Committee, and it was there to monitor and to suggest what was being done. Now, our role initially was to look at government policy objectives and to look at them within the bigger global framework. And it was very clear that there wasn't the instruments or there wasn't the means across government to make sure that what the Treasury did was in line with what the business department did. And it was really clear that there was a new approach that was needed to get all the ducks lined up. That's the only way I can think of describing it, to have this cross-cutting role at national level, so that whatever directives were coming out from Europe, or whatever role we were playing in actually influencing policies that should come out of Europe, which then would go on to negotiating at the UN level, or whatever policies were coming out of the Treasury, we're all going in the same direction, and we're all helping people to develop on the agenda. And it was felt that there wasn't that infrastructure, there wasn't that policy architecture there for the environment at national level. And so that's really what the committee which I now chair has been doing. And it's really interesting to see that one of the early things that was felt was needed was that there wasn't any expertise. You know, if you've got, say, finance and you're auditing what is good value for money in the business sense, and it's about an economic aspect, you've got the means of being able to evaluate how well different plans are performing. But that wasn't the case with the environment. And so what was done was that the Sustainable Development Roundtable, which eventually became the Sustainable Development Commission, was set up to be an engine room across government to try and bring all these different strands of policy together. Now, of course, everything moves on, and we're in a new landscape, and the government that we have in its wisdom has abolished the Sustainable Development Commission, and it's come out with a new way of looking at things and a new landscape. And so therefore, in that context, the Environmental Audit Select Committee's role is to really understand all the changes that are going on and to make sure that there is an alignment. And it's at this stage, I think, where the carbon reduction commitment actually fits in. And I do think it's important that we are aware that what happens next week in the budget could well influence and change things. And what happens in terms of other aspects of national policy could make it more difficult or less difficult. And somehow or another, our committee needs all of you and your engagement with your MPs to be able to help us monitor, audit, assess how well government is doing in the changes that it brings in. So what I'm effectively doing is saying to all of you who are ambassadors for the programme of energy efficiency in your own organisations, in this new landscape, to engage more with Parliament, keep abreast of the work that our committee does, and which the DEC committee, which is chaired by Tim Yeo, does, and make sure that where there are, circles that don't meet and obstacles that have to be overcome, we are aware of where that kind of lack of joined up thinking is. So that's the first thing that I wanted to say. The second point, really, and it's a much more difficult one, is one of the things that I find difficulty in is the whole issue of the local agenda. And I've done a lot of work in Parliament alongside the Climate Change Committee. And indeed, it was as a result of work that our Select Committee did, not exclusively, but played a part in helping form the public debate, which resulted in setting up the Climate Change Act, which I think we should be very proud of in the UK, and it is seen as an exemplar internationally. But I think that the issue about the Climate Change Act is that we have a Climate Change Committee reporting to Parliament, which you'll hear later, and we're about to enter the phase of its fourth report to Parliament, whereby it's setting out where we need to be up to the 2030 timescale in order to be on target to meet the climate change agenda and the reductions in carbon that we need to have. And obviously energy efficiency is a really important part of that. But the thing for me which doesn't quite square up is we're beginning to get this architecture in place at a national level, but where is it at the local level? And how does all your work, having to grapple with a CRC programme, climate reduction, whatever it is, carbon reduction programme, introduced, and then have the ground swept from under you, whereby what you thought was going to be an incentive is now being taken away from you and put into the Treasury's coffers. But the wider issue is, I think, at a local level, is how do we get a mirror of what we're trying to get in place nationally there at a local level, because you cannot do this on your own. And I think that there are various things which don't quite tie up at the moment, and it's the role of a parliamentary cross-cutting select committee to look at some of these. So I'd like to perhaps just share with you what happened to me on Friday when I got contacted by ITN, it was actually, Krishnan, and basically they said to me, Joan, we've just been told about this scheme that there is in your constituency whereby the local council was spending £135,000 installing solar panels onto the roof of the civic centre. And what they wanted to do was a bad news story. And what they wanted to do was, oh, you know, such terrible expenditure, what a waste of money. It would take however many years, 8 years, for there to be the money brought back. And they were not paying any attention whatsoever to the feed-in tariffs that there would be. And they were really not looking at the fact that the City Council was doing this as part of a wider policy and had a relationship with E.ON whereby they were putting 1,000 council properties with changes, and they were looking at a whole climate change reduction programme, and that this was just one. And I said to them, you know, you should be shouting this from the rooftops, but oh no, it was what a waste of money in this terrible time of the deficit and everything else. How irresponsible to be spending any amount of money whatsoever on something as unimportant as climate change. And I think that that is the dilemma that we have about how we make energy policy and energy efficiency as part of that, how we actually make it a priority. And it seems to me that if we can't align the local agenda with what's going on nationally and align what the Climate Change Committee is requiring of governments and link that to the local agenda as well, where we've got businesses and local authorities, we're not going to be able to get across to the general public either the importance for this whole objective that we had of reducing carbon. We're not reducing it just for reducing its sake. We're doing it because of all the evidence that there is. And also because of the issues about energy security and about the fact that in any case, energy costs are going to go through the roof anyway. And therefore, I believe that there are other, if you like, policy decisions which are going through Parliament at the moment, like the energy bill, like the localism bill, whereby we have to make sure that the changes in the CRC and the review that's coming about and what you need to make it work for you on the ground needs to be reflected in the response to the consultation, but it also needs to be reflected in other pieces of legislation. So, for example, I know that there are about 40 councils around the country who have been working with Friends of the Earth and who have got a memorandum of understanding with the local government, the new local government board, to, if you like, look at how energy reduction can come about. But if we don't have the certainty through the regulation, if we don't do all the cross-cutting at a local level, if we don't have the partnerships at a local level where the Environment Agency or whoever it is from DEC does get together with local leaders as well and business leaders and chambers of commerce and everybody else to understand what needs to be done and how it's going to be done, we will always be in a situation whereby, because there's no certainty and there's no direction, it's not something that you have to do, you're going to be criticised for wasting money without people understanding that the money that you are spending is linked to from the heart of Parliament, a Climate Change Act which requires climate change reduction. So I think there are huge question marks, and I think that, you know, to come along to what is a very technical debate on the CRC at a very uncertain time, because no one knows how the budget is going to affect all of this and how everything else is going to be lined up. It's important that we have this relationship and this dialogue and this debate in order that we can all go away understanding that as part of the bigger picture, we know what our role in it is. We can press for the changes that we need, but we can do that in a cross-cutting way, both locally and nationally. And that really is what I wanted to try and get across today, and hope that the debate that we will have and the detailed presentations from those who've got all the technical expertise on the nuts and bolts of this will help make this agenda go forward in the way that it urgently needs to do, particularly when we're all going to be challenged to find secure energy supplies, particularly given what's happened in Japan in the weeks and months ahead. So thank you very much indeed.